All right, thank you guys for checking out our presentation on the ethical concerns of Neuralink. I'm Logan, and this was put together with me, Deion, and Colton just over the semester. So, to introduce you guys to the topic, what are the ethical concerns of Neuralink? Well, when you look back about 20 years ago, and the technology that was about then, and you compare that to the technology today, there's technologies such as haptic feedback and neural networks is vastly different, and would seem alien and almost incomprehensible to people back then. While these technologies were being developed and thought about at the time, they took many years to materialize and develop. Similarly, it's important to be aware that the cutting edge technologies that are currently being developed and decades away from finalization, they're going to come about eventually, and it's important to remain ahead of the curve and be able to address the potential ethical concerns that are going to come out of those new technologies. So, one of the major new technologies that we're looking at today is the innovation of the Neuralink. It's currently being developed as a medical device to correct neurological conditions and impairments. But the CEO, Elon Musk, actually states that its ultimate goal down the road is to provide a symbiosis between the human mind and technology in order to aid in communication and human efficiency. The current method of implementation is through installing about a coin-sized device behind the ear in the human skull, and it connects to the brain with thousands of fine threads. So this can monitor the electrical impulses and brain activity that go on in the brain and simultaneously output electrical impulses of its own to correct any irregularities that it reads and be able to correct neurological conditions that way. As the technology develops further in future years, much further down the road, more resolution will be brought into the digital representation of the brain as it's able to read the brain, and more features will progress human enhancement. This certainly raises some ethical concerns and curiosities that deserve some further exploration. So we'll go into those.
Hey guys, in this section, I'll go over civilian interaction with certain facets of Neuralink, as well as how the government might play a hand in integrating such a device in society. Most of this is hypothetical since, of course, Neuralink isn't here yet, but without further ado, let's just jump into it. We can begin discussing the land before time. In other words, before we had the internet so readily available. Consumers started getting computers into their hands around the 1980s to put it in perspective. And of course, as we've all read, there were a bunch of scandals or events or situations where we had to enter a completely different frame of mind in order to answer these riveting questions. In some of these cases, the government had to create some type of hard rule or law in order to decide what was correct and what was incorrect. Therefore, I decided it might be worth diving into a world where the NSA, or the National Security Agency, and Neuralink exist. To start, let's base it on a situation where a decent amount of people are aware of the government spying on people's personal activities. So, government allows Neuralink to be distributed, and I'm sure immediately there would be a bunch of skeptics. These people would probably tell others not to trust the world to install a device into our brains. They'd likely say something along the lines of, oh, if they're getting into our data and listening to our phone calls, don't you think that they'd start listening to our thoughts? There will always be a market for the curious. Someone with nefarious intentions could even claim they found some classified evidence and data that proves that Neuralink causes brainwashing. Another person can make something up like a modification of Neuralink that doesn't do anything, and they just kind of scam people and get some cash. Neuralink's still a piece of technology at the end of the day. It's prone to messing up or having some kind of malfunction. Even adding on to those with nefarious intention, they could potentially cause malicious acts such as someone hacking into your Neuralink. Of course, the Neuralink has assured people that they've got all the hardware and software under control and that they'll have top-of-the-line security. But everyone knows that any program or software can be broken into. Nothing's foolproof. The example I saw online was about Apple talking about them controlling hardware and software, but Apple devices still get malware and viruses, so But in the case of an individual, let's say like there's a government individual with some top secret info or some information that a foreign entity could take advantage of. That'd be something to consider. Continuing on top of the malware, people get bored. Let's just say that someone makes a virus that just creates a tiny beeping noise inside your head. That'd get annoying pretty quickly, and that's something to definitely consider if we had Neuralink today. But as I said, it's still in development. This is all hypotheticals. Once it gets ramped up, governments are definitely going to have to steer Neuralink team into how they want things to play out. It'll have to go through many tests and many regulations. Things like risk management or ensuring that procedure itself is safe, and checking for any failures or accidents. All that will come into play. Something that's come in a lot of circulation is the term Neurorights. A Neurorite is a term utilized today by some people who are concerned about the role of neurotechnology in human rights. Neurorights essentially consist of 5 different principles: privacy and consent, identity, free will, augmentations, and bias. Thanks to activists who are concerned about the integration of neurotechnology, Neuralink will likely have to run into those problems and be cleared to make sure they don't violate any of these rights, assuming that these activists get everything done. A researcher known as Dr. Marcelo Yenka touched on a couple of rights that should be solidified in law. One of these was the right to cognitive liberty, which could fall under free will. This essentially argues that an individual should have the right to decide whether or not they want to use a given neurotechnology. I imagine that this won't come into play in our lifetimes due to economic reasons, but if someone was, say, incapacitated, how should doctors proceed if Neuralink is one of their options? Is it kind of like people being in a vegetative state and someone takes on the right for this person to live? That's a whole other debate. But anyways, another thing that would touch back towards the skepticism part of this would be someone's right to their mental privacy. What if the government had the power to read our inner thoughts? For example, in a country with an authoritarian regime, they could insert a module in Neuralink that could encourage a suspect to give law enforcement a confession or even change how they perceive a certain event. All these things are purely hypothetical. Neuralink isn't here yet, but it can be fascinating to speculate on what it could be.
All right, so the second ethical concern that we want to address is that of widening inequality gaps that could be caused by the Neuralink. Now, when we're considering the Neuralink, the benefits are pretty apparent. The initial development of the product is aimed to restore the abilities of impaired individuals. So the ethical concerns are not really related as much to the intended results of the device, since those results are all pretty humanitarian. However, later in the development of the life cycle, years down the road, the objective is been explained to shift more towards adding neurological capabilities to that of regular, non-impaired human beings. So it'll be adding additional functionality. The potential advantage of adjusting neurological conditions in this way include performance enhancements in cognitive areas such as working memory and attention, and even physical activities such as cycling. Additionally, communication and information transfer could be enhanced in remarkable ways by means of circumventing language or interfaces as barriers of communication. So we can actually see that the brain is currently limited in its methods of communications by the slowness of interfaces such as keyboards and mouses. So if brains had a way to directly communicate instead of being limited by some sort of interface, then we'd be much more efficient and much more precise in our communication. So the benefits of neurotechnology would certainly enhance users in a way that place them into an economically advantaged position. This ability to communicate more effectively and mentally function at a higher speed and resolution, it would definitely make the users more preferable for employment and interaction, simultaneously devaluing the utility of people who do not use the product. So this gap in preference would primarily be controlled by the affordability of such technology. So as it becomes market available, the highest bidders would have access if there wasn't any regulation. And this gap would definitely be exacerbated by the benefits of the technology, creating a cycle with potential for generational effects where families of those that originally have this device could potentially rise far beyond those that do not. So there is a potential that regulation could be put in place to promote access for all socioeconomic groups, but there could be significant legal issues in the regulation of sales and that sort of regulation. However, we would hope that that the technology, similar to the cell phone when it was released, would ultimately become available on a mass market scale, where the markets drive prices down and it becomes available to everyone quickly. So despite the long-term effects of inequality gaps introduced by Neuralink, the gap would certainly be significant during its initial rollout. So we would want to find a way to mitigate the effects of that gap through promoting widespread access or advantage regulation. That would be key to ensuring that individuals of higher socioeconomic groups don't gain some sort of dominance over lower socioeconomic groups. So, in addition, while the Neuralink has the potential to create some significant economic disparity, it is worth noting that other areas of life could be affected by the inequality gaps as well, since it's a device that has such far-reaching effects, potentially. So as we briefly mentioned earlier with the cycling, athletes that would have this device in its future state potentially could gain advantage over non-equipped athletes by use of optimizing their physical techniques through processing and adjusting the brain's electrical signals for their motor control. That's just one example of another way it could create inequality gaps. So these and many other advantages are possible through the use of the Neuralink. So it's imperative that as the development of the device continues, there's some consideration towards regulation or management for these inequality gaps, and we consider the ethics behind it in that sense.
Hello, my name is Colton, and our final ethical concern is data privacy and the ethics of writing to one's own brain. So, what we hear of Elon Musk's Neuralink gives us a glimpse into the future of neurotechnology. The idea that some piece of technology is able to control or write to one's own brain brings an entirely new train of thought. We must not only consider the usefulness of such a technology, but also the ethics behind it. What does it mean if some device were able to write to someone's brain? Does it mean that we could make people smarter or help suffering Alzheimer's patients? If that may come to be true, then does this mean that we could bend someone's thoughts towards a negative goal? In other words, mind control someone? The idea that one's brain can be written to is considerably scary. One could discuss the medical benefits this would offer, but it would also bring a rise of potentially malicious behavior. Some might be able to use this to extract information from a criminal, but in the same light, one could kidnap an individual and extract top secret information. Just like we have seen in many sci-fi movies, criminals will always find a way to use technology in an evil way. So we must decide, do the benefits outweigh the potential negatives? Another concern we should focus on is data privacy. How much biodata should Neuralink, or the government for that matter, be able to collect about you? Just like companies collect statistical advertising data about how much of your internet consumption, how much data companies should be able to collect about one's own brain. Depending on the applications of such a technology, could one bend another's mind toward a specific goal or objective? We must keep a careful eye on how this technology may be used to surveil, collect intelligence, and control those who have this device installed. So, in conclusion, the potential of the Neuralink device is quite incredible if research progresses at acceptable speeds and the theoretical possibilities prove to be implementable. These advantages that would be ushered in by the technology are not without equal concern, however. Special consideration should be given to ethical issues that arise with the integration of technology in the brain before it becomes a reality. The access to user data by government and law enforcement would be a large concern to personal rights. The possibility of developing unfair advantages for non-users becomes an issue with the potential economic advantage given by such a technology. Also, the potential for brain and thoughts to be affected in ways that are not agreeable to the user or otherwise unethical could be possible. These and other considerations are vital to be established and discussed before Neuralink makes its way to usage in the public sector. Thank you.